I almost don't have to say this today. My name is Michelle McMurray. I'm the director of the health program. I do have to say that here at the Aspen Institute. But what was coming to mind is that you are in the perfect place at the perfect time. There is no more timely time to be discussing healthcare, health reform, and how science and innovation can really think about our health and our bodies. So welcome. Welcome to Aspen in this gorgeous spot to a wonderful meeting. You're going to have a great time. At the Aspen Institute, we do things a little bit differently. Every time we have a gathering, we make sure that it is festive, that it is fun. Ask questions, to have a good time, and to really enjoy the next 4 days. So 2 years ago, at the first Aspen Health Forum, we gathered and we kicked off the Aspen Health Stewardship Project, which was a task force of 14 thought leaders in healthcare, many of whom are with us today in the room. And we asked them to come up with a bipartisan set of principles that would describe what would our nation talk about if we didn't just talk about expanding access to health insurance, which we all think is critically important, but we focused more on the long-term goal of actually making the nation healthier. And who would have thought 2 years ago that we'd actually be in the midst of a debate where some of those principles that our task force laid out were really within reach, maybe not totally accomplished, maybe still an uphill road to go, but much, much closer than it was at that first Aspen Health Forum. I won't bore you with all of the 10 principles, but some of them are really interesting, and I think you'll find them woven through the theme over the next 4 days. For example, the group said as our very first principle, access is not enough. We need more health insurance, but even those of us with health insurance often find the medical system very difficult to navigate and often very difficult to use as an instrument to promote better health. We shouldn't have to tell our children they won't live as long as we will because of rising rates of childhood obesity. We should look at health in all policies, not just health-related policies, so that we measure the impact of a freeway that interrupts a playground in an inner-city neighborhood, and that we talk about our trade policies and whether or not they make us choose healthier choices at the grocery store or unhealthier ones. We need equality in health, not just health insurance, and most importantly, we need to turn information into insight. And that's what I think is going to be most interesting over the next 4 days, is to talk about how the scientific research and really promoting innovation and new developments getting to patients is really going to play an increasingly important role in our healthcare system. So everyone's afraid right now, ourselves included, our wonderful co-presenters, Time Magazine, that we're so excited to welcome to this second Aspen Health Forum. They're concerned that this debate, the healthcare debate that's taking place right now in Washington and across the nation, may devolve into partisan bickering like we saw in '93. And if it doesn't, will it actually make us healthier? And I think you're going to hear the answers to those questions over the next 4 days here. You may hear conflicting answers, and there may be debate and disagreement, but that's in the Aspen tradition. You're going to hear lots of different points of view, and we welcome it. So, the Health Forum, I often get the question, what is it designed to do? It's really designed to bring people who think about health and medicine and science together with people who perhaps don't do it as their daily work, but it impacts their lives, the lives of their families, their pocketbook, their investments. This is the one gathering, and of course that's the brainchild of our president, Walter Isaacson, that really brings all those different sectors together to say we all have a voice in how we fund and pay for and respond to health and medicine in our culture. And that's what we want to do. So a few housekeeping notes. In addition, for those of you who were with us at the first Aspen Health Forum, we organized everything in panel format. This year we're mixing it up a bit. In addition to panels, we have some keynote addresses, and we also have what we're calling the Big Idea series, and that's what we're going to start with this evening. For each of our 10 topical tracks, we have a Big Idea session in which we've asked a series of speakers to give very short, insightful, and incisive remarks that answer the question, in your opinion, what is the biggest idea in your field? What do we need to pay attention to in the coming decades? So I think the Big Idea sessions are going to be very fascinating and a really fun opportunity to hear contrasting points of view. A couple of things about our location. As beautiful as it is, we want to remind everyone, if you haven't been to Aspen before, be sure to drink plenty of water. You are at a high altitude, and we want to make sure you stay well hydrated. We're so kind to have the gift from Lyndon Stewart Resnick of Fiji water that's all around campus. So please drink up. Drink up and remain hydrated. We also want to alert you that there are bears sometimes seen around here at night in particular. Everyone who's been here often or lives here doesn't seem afraid of them, but those of us who visit sometimes do. So I would just remind you to remain a little bit alert. And then just enjoy. We're going to start early tomorrow morning. Each morning we have the option of yoga and nature walks, as well as launching into our breakfast sessions. In the afternoons, we'll come together for some large plenary sessions, and we have some very fun evening events for you, including a champagne and s'mores evening hosted by Billy Tozen over in the Meadows tomorrow night from 10 to 12. So come to the evening exchanges, come and enjoy, toast some marshmallows, and enjoy the conversation. So we thought we'd kick the weekend off with two of the most enticing questions or issues, food and sex. We thought that's always a good way to start any conversation. And the very first session we have is on the food issues, and we have a great selection of speakers for you tonight. The very first speaker is Adam Danowski. He's famous for uncovering how your zip code can make you fat, and also how times of economic downturn can lead families to pick unhealthier choices in grocery stores. He's a very provocative clinician talking about nutrition and obesity today, and I'm sure he's going to keep you very entertained. He's the director of the Center for Public Health Nutrition at the University of Washington in Seattle and the author of more than 200 papers. Please welcome Adam Danowski.
Any new big idea is controversial by definition. There are 4 stages of acceptance of a new big idea. The first stage is, this cannot possibly be true. The second stage is, Dr. Danowski is just being provocative. The third stage is, well, even if correct, it's a trivial idea, not worthy of serious attention. And the fourth stage is, I have always said this same thing myself. So the challenge before me is to take you along with me in the next 10 minutes on this journey from stage 1, disbelief denial, to final acceptance. And when you talk to the New York Times, and you will, you can say, I have said the same thing myself as that other guy, what's his name? So what is the big idea? The big idea is controversial and to some extent provocative, but it's actually very simple. The idea is that healthier foods cost more and energy-dense, unhealthy foods cost less. And we generally deny it because many of our strategies for dietary change have to do with recommending expensive foods to low-income people. Trust me, it is not going to work. So let's look at this concept that energy-dense foods, those which contain calories but no nutrients, many calories per gram, are cheaper than the foods that give you more nutrients than calories. You know very well that the American food supply is higher in grains and sugars and added fats than it used to be, and those foods can supply, in some cases, several thousand calories per dollar. On the other hand, if you go towards fresh produce, lean meats, fresh yogurt, dairy products, you will fast realize that the most expensive ingredient in foods is actually water. Water is what keeps the food perishable, requires the cold chain, transportation, and so on. And fresh foods loaded with nutrients are more expensive than sugar-containing foods with an indefinite shelf life. And then there's something about energy-dense foods, think chocolate. Whether because they are not really satiating, maybe because they taste so good, we tend to overeat. So actually, if you try to save money on food, you will fall into a trap. By going below a certain daily amount, you will end up with energy-dense foods which give you calories but very few nutrients. By paying less, you will in fact eat more. And that simple idea has a number of consequences. People who eat cheap foods are people who have no money. They live in low-income neighborhoods. Those houses aren't worth as much as houses elsewhere where people are better fed and lean. So as a result, obesity in the United States and other places as well does follow a socioeconomic gradient. Higher rates are observed in lower income neighborhoods, deprived areas, and obesity has absolutely everything to do with social class. In Seattle, we found that the best predictor of high obesity rates wasn't poverty, wasn't income, wasn't education. It actually was the median price of houses in a given zip code. So real estate values, actually a measure of wealth, are a predictor of health and disease. And in fact, this is where the imperatives of public health nutrition come up against what I call the imperatives or the necessities of a free market economy. On one hand, we want everybody to eat healthful, nutritious foods. On the other hand, we realize at some level that the free market economy needs cheap calories for the working poor. This is not a new concept. The first food substitute was actually sugar. Sugar was the fuel that fueled the British Industrial Revolution. Sugar provided empty calories to urban poor in the 19th century, and by 1900, the British working class was deriving 16% of calories from sugar. Right now, soft drinks have replaced that function, and they too deliver calories to lower income groups. So when you tell me obesity in New York is caused by soft drinks, let's tax them, I say people in New York who consume most soft drinks live in East Harlem, the Bronx, and parts of Brooklyn. Was it the extra 4 calories of a soft drink, or was it poverty, lack of education, unemployment, discrimination, general depression? You tell me. And I'm thinking it really is the problem of social gradient that outweighs the issue of nutrition. Now, this issue of substituting foods for other foods, again, isn't new. Back in the 1890s, the US Department of Agriculture embarked on a program of research to show that the same nutrients could be obtained cheaper. Wilbur Atwater, the father of human nutrition research in the United States, had a program to show that protein from beans was actually much the same as protein from steak, except cheaper. Of course, this was before the discovery of vitamins. He said fruits and vegetables contained only water and were, quote unquote, a conceit. But the search was on for cheaper ingredients, cheaper nutrients, reducing foods to nutrients which could be obtained more cheaply. And what followed was attempts to substitute dairy cream with vegetable oils, beef steak with texturized soy protein, fruit juices with high fructose corn syrup or with concentrated apple juice, another word for sugar, and our diets are becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And at the same time, we tell people, the people who are consuming those diets, don't do this, eat more vegetables, eat more fruit, you really ought to be eating healthier, without necessarily owning up that this is an economic decision for them with many consequences. And they do what they do, not because they're ignorant or stupid, but because their resources are limited. And in fact, we talk about free choice without sometimes acknowledging that some segments of our society do not have a choice, or in fact the choice has been made for them long ago by powerful economic forces totally beyond their control. So to sum up, there's a challenge. What do we do? Michael Pollan had an answer. He said, pay more, eat less. Well, that does work for some people. It probably does work for him and a number of other people at, I'm not going to say anything nasty about Berkeley. I too am an academic on the West Coast, so I feel for Berkeley. But at the same time, there are a number of people in our society who don't have those resources, so what to do? So we have this duality here, the nutrition imperatives and the economic imperatives. And what has happened is we, to some extent, live in a climate of fear. We warn people not to have the saturated fats, the trans fats, the sugars, the ingredients that we put into the foods in the first place to make them cheaper. We want everyone to have better diets. So my suggestion is, and this is where industry and agriculture and academia and research and community groups need to come together, is to refocus our attention from bad nutrients to good and better foods. And the idea is that we should be focusing on the nutrients in foods and value them. So that paying more to eat less is actually not a bad idea as long as you're getting more nutrients relative to the calories you consume. But my concern is that some segments of our society cannot follow us on that path, and some special provisions should be made for them. You may have heard from other sources that obesity is supposed to be the result of living in a toxic environment. My take on this is rather different. I say that obesity is a toxic consequence of living in an uncertain and insecure economic environment, and that the obesity epidemic we've been reading about for the past several years ought to have been a warning sign for us all that some people in our society were not doing quite so well. And right now, many of us aren't doing quite so well, so my pessimistic prediction is that obesity rates probably will go up and not down. So these are my big ideas and big challenges, and I'll be grateful to hear your comments later on. Thank you.
We started off the evening with some challenges, and now we're going to turn to someone who stands at that intersection of agriculture and industry that Adam discussed. Secretary Glickman spent almost 18 years in the House of Representatives before becoming President Clinton's Secretary of Agriculture. He is currently the chairman and CEO of the Motion Picture Association of America. So he stands right at the intersection of culture and food. And we thought he would be a great way to welcome this conversation this evening. Secretary Glickman?
Thank you.
I know what a lot of people think. What does going from agriculture to the movies, the film industry, have in common? And I tell people that I used to grow popcorn and now I sell it. But that's not true, actually. But any event, I spent 6 years at USDA, which is ultimately the fulcrum of our national government's policy historically on food, farm, and nutrition. And I see that the issue is becoming more and more a part of our health review. And so I suppose my big idea is, in this world where 1 billion people are, shall I say, obese, and 1 billion people are seriously underfed. Remember, we have 1 billion people who are on the edge of famine in this world every single day. So it's a double-edged sword, what we've got here. But the big idea is that food and farm issues must be a bigger part of our national and international agenda, and that we all are in this together. Napoleon once said that war is too important to be left to the generals. And truthfully, food and farm policy are too important just to be left to the farmers and agribusiness interests. And so I think it's healthy that we discuss this. I want to give you one public policy case study, and that is the National School Lunch Program, which many people believe was the most successful social program in the 20th century. How did this come about? It's very interesting. We provided some foods in schools before the Second World War, but in 1944 and 1945, we started to have trouble getting people drafted into the Army. And after Franklin Roosevelt died, General Hershey went to see President Truman. And he said, I've got a problem. Half of our draftees are ineligible for service. What was the reason? The reason was largely bad or no teeth caused by bad nutrition. That is, these people were nutritionally deficient to enter service. And so out of that, President Truman and others said, we need to have one place where at least every kid in America will have a place to eat at least one wholesome meal a day. And out of that grew the National School Lunch Program, which arguably has done a lot, even with the problems of the program. We're going to talk about in one of our panels tomorrow, even with those problems of making a big change in people's lives. But I do think that there is very little public attention to the issues of food and health. We've had a Surgeon General's report. We had a White House conference on food and nutrition some years ago. Now it seems that everybody's become an expert. Everybody has their diet panacea for our problems and our issues. I notice one of our speakers, Dr. Nancy Snyderman, has a diet book out there that you can all buy, and it may be wonderful, and she may have found the perfect solution to the problem that I've been looking for all my life. But I don't know. So anyway, I'm going to give you some specifics where I think, based on my experience in the government and now in the private sector, things that have come to my mind. Okay, number one. Only 25% of medical schools offer special classes in nutrition for medical students. Imagine that. 75% don't. So you go to your family doctor, he or she is supposed to know something about this subject, and I suspect that this is, in one respect, something that's a serious flaw in our whole medical system. It's gotten better, but it's still not a required course in most medical schools. And so that's a big idea, I think. There is no university requirement for basic nutrition courses for folks who go into classroom teaching by education schools in this country. So part of a teacher's certificate should be a basic course in nutrition. We require them to have basic courses in a lot of things. And some states are experimenting with this, their school food service people. But I guess these 2 points go to the fact that we need an infrastructure in this country of people who know something about this subject matter and can particularly deal with it at the children's level. And there are, I think that this can be done. There is greater attention at the school level, in and out of the cafeteria, which we'll talk about tomorrow. The Wic Program, Women, Infant, Children's Program, now requires fresh fruits and vegetables for the 8 million people who are in it. And they're also eligible to use coupons at the very large and growing National Farmers Market movement in this country. The Defense Department has dramatically increased fresh fruits and vegetables in their commissaries and in their programs. Those are good things that are happening. I'd mentioned this at the beginning. I've been absolutely amazed at the lack of unanimity of research, and I hope Adam is able to lead us into the promised land on this thing. But I remember it when I was at USDA, we held a big hearing on diet. We had a lot of these diet gurus, Dr. Atkins, Dr. Ornish, Dr. Barry Sears, and we had this thing about what diet is better for you. And at USDA, they did most of the human research that's done on nutrition. And so at the end of this session, and I don't recall who it was, but one person looked at Dr. Atkins, who was the high-protein, low-carb diet, and said, every time I look at you, Dr. Atkins, I think of that little boy in the movie The Sixth Sense when he said, I see dead people. And, what struck me about that is, boy, if these folks are so diametrically opposed to each other, how does an average person figure out what the heck is going on in their lives? Well, one way to do that is to have a much more significant accelerated research effort at universities around this country, working with the private sector. And the food companies are not enemies in this because they're the ones that are going to sell most of the food to us, and so they need to be part of the solution as well. So that clearly has to be in the mix. We know that there's a link between diet and health, but people are very confused. And some simple rules of the road would make a big difference in all of our lives. We can't follow them all the time, but most of the time we can. Okay, physical activity and education. Only one state still requires physical education as part of its state-mandated curriculum to state boards of education. That's the state of Illinois. Now, that doesn't mean that other states or local school districts don't have problems, but common sense tells you that a lack of exercise among kids, because of a lot of reasons, it may be television, it may be safety issues, maybe parents' working culture, whatever it is. But it's somehow we've got to realize that it's not just about food, it's about movement. And these things have to go together, and that has to be part of our national policy. I mentioned the involvement of the media and the food companies particularly. More and more I see that the food industry knows that good nutrition makes economic sense and may give some of them a competitive advantage as well. You see changes occurring with respect to school vending machines and companies that are involved in that kind of thing. I don't think we can look at the industry as an enemy in all this stuff, but I do think we have to continue to prod them to try to do the right thing and show that it's in their economic interest. This is a complicated issue, and it was John Maynard Keynes who said, for every complicated problem, there is a simple and a wrong solution. And this one is no better than any others. Part of it goes back to the whole issue of research, having the data, having the knowledge base, so that then we can give ordinary people simple but effective information about what to do, so that doctors, physicians, healthcare practitioners, nurses, and the medical profession can do this, so that the schools can do this as well, and so that all other parts of our other institutions in American society can do this as well. So I suppose my big idea is that this is a big, complicated issue. It's an issue that has to involve the government, the private sector, the university community, the schools in this country. But together, the solutions are not all that complicated. It's just providing the leadership to get everybody together to try to do it better than we've done in the past. Thank you all very much.
Well, we're moving on to Linda Resnick. Many of you know her as the Palm Queen, but you may not know that she's also the founding funder of the Aspen Health Initiative. And we're so grateful that her founding gift has allowed us over the last 4 years to really explore some of these topics. This marketing guru and nutrition advocate is famous for making nutritional choices sexy, including Palm Wonderful, Fiji Water, and Everybody's Nuts. And we thought, who better than the new author of the book, Rubies in the Orchard, to come and talk to us about how you market nutritional choices to the American public in a way that works. Linda?
Hello, everybody. Thank you. So, you heard about obesity. Did you realize that 2/3 of the U.S. population is overweight and 1/4 of the U.S. population is struggling with obesity? And I was horrified to read a recent study that came out earlier this year that tells us that 1 out of every 5 4-year-olds is obese. Kids are now becoming overweight before they can reach the levers on the vending machines that were going to make them even fatter in their teens. And from a public policy standpoint, these increased rates of obesity could actually condemn our youths to shorter lifespans than their parents. Obesity is a risk factor for heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, and certain types of cancer. And it also leads to $95 billion a year in medical expenditures. And that number still sounds big, doesn't it? And half of that is paid by the taxpayers. Now, who and what is to blame for this national tragedy? It's no secret that the family meal has devolved. It once played a primary role as the center of human life, but today a child's meal is likely to consist of very highly processed food, gobbled down greedily and in haste. On the grocery store shelves, packaged goods scream out with all sorts of claims: fat-free, light, reduced calories, all natural, healthy choice, whole grain, antioxidants. But often these claims are only half the story, created more to confuse the consumer and mislead them. I've often spent my Sunday mornings cringing over the Sunday paper, looking at the coupons with all those new and improved horrible foods that are coming out this week that you get $1 off on your coupon. There's a famous story in marketing that harks back to the 40s. No one in this room is old enough to remember, but in those days, people used to eat canned salmon as a sandwich filler. And then the tuna fish industry came along and decided that they had to make inroads, because before that, people didn't eat tuna fish in a sandwich. So they hired a very smart advertising group who came up with the slogan, "Guaranteed not to turn pink in the can." It worked. And all of us in marketing used to laugh about that deceit. But compared to what we see today, it's really almost charming. The refrigerated shelves and the shelf-stable aisles of the supermarket are some of the worst perpetrators. Minute Maid has a juice they call pomegranate blueberry, and I guess you would think that it was made out of pomegranate and blueberry juice. Now, I do have an axe to grind being in this business, but I have to tell you that you would be wrong about that product. Study the back label, and you'll find that apple juice is the first ingredient, and grape juice is the second ingredient, and these are the predominant ingredients. Now, pomegranate shows up third, and then there's fruit and vegetable juices for color, and then the sad little blueberry shows up at the end. And the antioxidants that they speak of are added, like vitamin C. They're not naturally occurring, because apple juice and grape juice in this state don't have any antioxidants. Now, what's so troubling about this deception is that we know from our research that consumers drink pomegranate juice for the health benefits. In fact, urologists and cardiologists recommend it to their patients to protect them from hardening of the arteries and prostate cancer. Now, when a consumer drinks a product that they think is pomegranate juice to help ward off prostate cancer, what they're actually getting is little or no pomegranate juice. This is a consumer protection issue as well as a public health issue. Now, the cereal industry is another example. We've come to accept those cute little words, "contents may settle in shipping." And we find a third of the boxes filled with cereal. And that may be the best news of all, because you may see whole grain screaming from the label, but inside it only accounts for a small percentage, perhaps, of the grain used. And just about all the cereal that shows you fruit on the outside of the package doesn't have any fruit at all. But what you'll find plenty of is the root of all evil, high fructose corn syrup. You can find high fructose corn syrup in baked goods, candy, snacks, dairy products, soda, and my drug of choice, NyQuil. It's in everything. It has virtually replaced sugar in the American diet. Here's a little background. It was invented by a Japanese researcher in 1970. By 1980, it had replaced sugar in virtually everything. Not coincidentally, from 1980 on, we saw a rise in the incidence of obesity in America. Why do food manufacturers use it? I thought you'd never ask. Because corn is cheap. In fact, it's cheaper to buy than it is to grow. How can that be? Well, corn farmers are subsidized by the U.S. government to the tune of several $billions of your tax dollars every year. It all comes from a fascinating document, and there's only one man in the room that has read it, the Farm Bill. And if you have a month to kill, you can read it too. There are medical indications that our bodies don't metabolize corn, and that high fructose corn syrup doesn't digest as easily as natural sugar. Too much fructose raises your triglycerides, increasing the risk of not only obesity, but diabetes and heart disease. And there are indications that high fructose foods influence the appetite hormone, decreasing sensation of fullness and leading to overeating. In his new book, The End of Overeating, Taking Control of the Insatiable American Appetite, former FDA Commissioner David Kessler describes how, since the 1980s, the food industry, in collusion with the advertising industry, have brought about lifestyle changes that have short-circuited the body's self-regulating mechanism, leaving many Americans at mercy of these reward-driven energy-less foods. They have high energy, no food content, as the two previous speakers told you. Kessler explains how the desire to eat, which is distinct from the act of eating itself, is stimulated in the brain by an almost infinite variety of diabolical combinations that we all know and love of salt, fat, and sugar. Although not everyone succumbs, more people of all ages are being set up for a lifetime of food obsession. What's the answer? In the face of growing chronic disease epidemic, how can we help consumers make healthier purchasing decisions when they're faced with a plethora of misleading advertising and packaging claims? How can we persuade them to eat healthier food? An IBM poll released in June found that 77% of Americans want more information about the food that they buy. And that's hardly a surprise. Michael Pollan, who I worship, I have a statue of him on my dashboard, is said in the new film, Food, Inc., the way we eat has changed more in the last 50 years than in the previous 10,000. Nothing could be truer. We know less about our food than our grandparents did. In part, that's because the process of creating food is done in a laboratory, where most of American meals now originate. And it's less familiar than the food that we grow in the garden. Food processors may be obligated to print the ingredients in the back of the label, but what they don't have to tell you is what percentage of each ingredient is in the food. And that is the crux of the matter. In my book, Rubies in the Orchard, I discuss the importance of transparency in building a great brand in the 21st century. And transparency, I assure you, was the reoccurring theme at just about every panel at the Ideas Festival last month. Nowhere is transparency more needed than in the food industry. It's time we pull back the curtain from the food production system and demand that food manufacturers stop false marketing claims and explain what and how much of it is in their products. We need honesty and transparency in food labeling. Food manufacturers and fast food chains will tell you that controlling the obesity rate is all about personal responsibility. Well, personal responsibility is one thing when it comes to nutrition and healthy eating, but without clear and accurate information, how can we make those choices? We need to tear down this Tower of Babel labeling scheme propped up by food companies. We need reforms. One of the things we're doing at Palm Wonderful for our pomegranate juice blend is actually putting the specific juice percentages on the ingredient declaration label, even though we don't have to do it by law. Consumers will know when they buy pomegranate blueberry that it's 86% pomegranate and 14% blueberry. Nothing else, nothing more. All we're asking is that we bring the U.S. labeling standards up to the rest of the civilized world. In the United Kingdom, they have a system using green, yellow, and red dots to rank fat, sugar, and salt as low, medium, or high on all their foods. The Swedish government has a system featuring green keyhole-shaped symbols to identify the healthiest choices within a food category. Here in the U.S., there's a wonderful supermarket chain called Hannaford. In the Northeast, they use a sophisticated nutrition criteria as a basis for awarding to the most products in its store either 1, 2, or 3, or 0 stars, alongside the price of the item to tell you how good it is for you. And they even rank their own private labels that way. Of course, the best way to avoid labeling dilemma is to eat whole food straight from the local farmer. You don't need a label when you pick a vegetable from your farmer's market, and you don't need to check on it when your meats come from Neiman's Ranch. And as you know, the perimeter of the supermarket, as I've been quoted as saying, is the medicine chest of the 21st century in the produce department. Ironically enough, one of the most positive developments of this great recession is that more families who can are growing their own produce. And consumer demand for vegetable seed this spring abruptly climbed at a rate that industry veterans had never seen before. Victory gardens during the Second World War accounted for 40% of the vegetables that were consumed in America. Healthful, sustainable food is no longer a trend. It's become a part of the national social conscience. Michelle Obama, with her Victory Garden at the White House, is inspiring people, especially young people, to grow their own food, not because it's a greener option necessarily, but because it puts the power of knowledge in the hands of the consumer. Movies like Food Inc. and Super Size Me, and books like In Defense of Food and Fast Food Nation, and sea changers like Alice Waters have prompted the public to perform a gut check on what's wrong with our food system. We know that what we eat has consequences for ourselves, our families, and the world. Now we need to turn education into action. But sadly, for so many American families, the 30% in the wrong zip codes that are living at or below the poverty line, growing their own food or even buying healthy food, is only a dream. Common sense, transparent food labeling is the first step to educating all Americans so they can protect themselves from eating foods that promote obesity, heart disease, and other serious health problems. I encourage you to join me in this debate. Write to your representative, your senator, and demand FDA food labeling changes. Seek out other concerned consumers. Make yourself known by speaking up. Let your local grocer know you'd be interested in more information. There are tons of online communities like GetSatisfaction.com and Good.com that support transparency in the food industry. We all deserve the truth. Push for transparency in the food you eat. You'll be healthier. Our children and grandchildren will be healthier. And we all know that optimum health is the best way to face the challenges of our troubled world. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Our next speaker is Laurie Tish. Laurie Tish is the founder and president of the Laurie M. Tish Illumination Fund, a philanthropy that has a wide mission, but part of that mission is to promote healthier choices for the citizens of New York City. And to that end, they've exploited the cultural icon of the fast food cart that's ubiquitous on New York streets to create what they call green carts that offer healthy options in a fast food format.
Thanks so much, Michelle. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm only slightly offended that you didn't ask me to be on the sex panel, but but I'm looking forward to coming back next year for that. So when I look around this room, I see many baby boomers, obviously myself included, and I trust that you won't mind when I take some liberties when I refer to our day, and hope that you will understand and recall some of the past references that I'm going to make. And it is in that context that I'm going to take a few minutes to speak about my big idea, which I have subtitled, Those Who Can, Should. In the 1960s, many of us were deeply involved in some very visible and often valuable social movements, specifically those having to do with the war in Vietnam and issues surrounding race and inequality. We raised our voices and, yes, sometimes our fists, and to a great degree, we were heard. From that activism flowed significant changes in policy and practice. The Vietnam War ended, and the civil rights and affirmative actions were passed. Over time, old forms of discrimination ceased to be an acceptable practice in education, employment, or housing, opening vast opportunities where before there were far too few. More than 40 years have passed, during which time our generation got busy, focusing on career, family, personal growth, and fulfillment. Some remained active, but many struggled with financial and time constraints, making it tough to focus on larger issues in that same deeply personal way. My big idea, Those Who Can Should, suggests that it's time to change. It's time for us to get back in the game. Once again, we're at a crossroads of a unique and special time in history as we witness the convergence of two transformational events. Except for perhaps the Gilded Age, we are in the midst of the largest transfer of wealth in U.S. history, and at the very same time, our country has experienced the deepest economic downturn since the Great Depression. This plays out in a growing and increasingly glaring gap between the haves and have-nots. The disparities manifest themselves in health status, health insurance, and also in access to healthy, nutritious food. I'm not an economist and won't try to tell you why these cross currents have occurred at this time or what should be done about it. But I do know that this is truly a pivotal time in the history, culture, and politics of our country. It's a time when the old ways of doing things is simply not working well enough, and when no single person or administration has all of the answers about how we can come together to repair our nation and our world and rebuild our economy and our communities hardest hit by extreme poverty, disadvantage, and the many problems that accompany it. As I see it, this is a time when living the expression, the personal is political, has never been truer or more important as a standard to follow when conducting one's life. We consider doing something to help, but are often overwhelmed by the 24 news feeds. Is Rick Stengel here yet? Sorry, Rick. The 24 news feeds telling us about global warming, terrorism, historic rates of unemployment, corruption, food shortages internationally, as well as in our very own cities, and the list goes on. But then a different kind of story breaks, and we get a word about something amazing being done by someone who understands these enormous challenges, but is undaunted in their belief that they can make things better. So what does all of this have to do with the Aspen Health Forum and this Big I Food plenary? Very simply, to me it means, as I said when I began, those who can should. It means that each one of us has to pay attention, take stock, and figure out how to take advantage of this truly defining moment in which we find ourselves and our country. Sitting out and ignoring the hardships of so many is not an option, or at least not a very good one. This is the time for heroic acts of generosity. And while no single person can take on all or solve all of the challenges, each of us has the ability to do so much more. And I know that so many of you in the room are doing it. My big idea is that people with means and wherewithal have an obligation and opportunity, and to help with time, money, and expertise, we can take on challenges that we face in the near term of our country so our citizens and our communities can get through this difficult transition and come out stronger in the years ahead. Those who can should is something that I've tried to take to heart and a principle I try to live by, but it has taken on greater urgency and importance. I started my foundation almost 2 years ago in response to my own conscience and values, and to make manifest my growing belief in my own responsibility to make things better, an expectation that was taught to me by my parents and one that I'm trying to teach to my daughters. I was disturbed by the growing inequality and disparities, and I knew I was fortunate enough to be able to make a difference. The first grant that we at the laureate Tish Illumination gave was for something called New York City Green Carts, hence the green and white, an effort to take the ubiquitous street food culture of New York, think Sabret's hot dog guy on the street, and make it work in the neighborhoods where there was little fresh, healthy food available. Imagine fruits and vegetables instead of chips and soda. At first, I was skeptical. I really didn't believe that in 2008 in New York City, a modern cosmopolitan city, that there were people getting sick with heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, and obesity, and other diet-related illnesses, simply because they had little or no access to fresh food or protests or other healthy foods. I was really shocked to learn that grocery stores in low-income neighborhoods stock low-grade produce, misshapen, bruised, and quick to spoil, and actually at higher prices than I find in the stores and on the streets in my own neighborhood. But one trip to a grocery store in Morrisania in the South Bronx convinced me. Imagine feed-grade carrots, lumpy, knobby, and 4 inches in diameter, moldy cauliflower, bunches of wrinkled grapes, and potatoes with buds ready to sprout. Blah! It was clear that there had to be a way to make fresh produce available in neighborhoods where poor access and concentrations of diet-related illness were occurring. I was deeply troubled by the fact that there were people in New York City who were hungry or unwell because of a lack of nutritious food. This wasn't the developing world. This was my own city. So we joined forces with the mayor's office and the Department of Health, and we crafted legislation and a new licensing process to create a unique kind of street vending permit for fresh fruits and vegetables in disadvantaged neighborhoods. Quite simply, we rolled out New York City green carts. With private funding and government initiative, we were able to create a new retail food supply and meet a major public health challenge at the same time. Our grant to the mayor's fund includes support for business development, up to 1,000 new vendor businesses and jobs, and microcredit that provides startup capital to aspiring New York City green card vendors. We also financed advertising and community education and marketing materials. Actually, you can hear more about the New York City green cards at our panel on Sunday at 9, A Healthier Bite of the Big Apple. I'm sorry for the advertising, the advertising bite, but our panel is up against Goldie Hawn and Deepak Chopra, as well as Dr. Victor Zhao. So we need all the advertising we could get. We're also giving out guests, fruits and vegetables, so please come. But getting back to the big idea, people who can should. My point is that each of us should take a look around. There are so many opportunities to get involved. There will always be someone we think is better suited, in a better position, or who knows more. But why wait for someone else before taking action? The key is to find your passion, whether it is food access and availability, or healthy eating, or exercise and fitness to reduce obesity. There are no lack of opportunities. Find what you care about and spring into action. Thank you.
That was such a wonderful mix of outlining the issues and the problems, coming up with some possible solutions, and then bringing it back to us to see what we can do as individuals to make a difference. I hope you see those themes throughout the next 4 days and enjoy hearing the different points of view. I mentioned in the opening that our media partner for this event has been Time Magazine. They have been an incredible and tireless partner, and we were so pleased to work with them on the second Aspen Health Forum.